So welcome to our first virtual wine tasting and discussion with Westcott Vineyards. Very happy to be here, and I hope everybody's staying well in these crazy times. I'm Carolyn Hurst. I'm the owner of Westcott Vineyards with my husband Grant Westcott, and this is Casey Kulsick, our winemaker.
Hello.
So we're here today to talk about this crazy idea of people in Canada growing fantastic Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and making fabulous wines. We're sitting today inside our winery on the second floor. I'm looking out over the vineyards. I can see Garrett, our son, out on the tractor, doing some work. He's deep ripping the soil right now, and we've been applying manure, composted manure, not to get too technical right out of the gate, but we are absolutely hands-on vigneron here at Westcott Vineyard. Casey was helping spread manure yesterday, so our winemaker is not only a great winemaker, he's also a heck of a tractor driver.
Smelly one, if nothing else.
You smell much better today. So we're looking out over the vineyard, and from up here, we can see across Lake Ontario to the CN Tower on the skyline of downtown Toronto. So just as a bit of a quick geography lesson in terms of where we are on the Niagara Peninsula. The Niagara Peninsula is a land formation that exists in between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. So Lake Ontario to the north and Lake Erie to the south. The Niagara River runs from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, and it falls over the Niagara Escarpment at Niagara Falls. So that's what is so important in terms of where we're making our wines and where our vineyards are and growing. The Niagara Escarpment is a critical component of the geology that allows for us to create the wines that we do. We're proudly Canadian, proudly from Niagara. I grew up not far. I was actually born in London, in England. My father was a surgeon there and did a residency, and they had me while they were there. But I grew up not far from where our current winery and a vineyard and home is. So the Niagara Escarpment, very important. Ancient seabed, 30 million years ago. We've had 5 or 6 eras of glaciers in the interim, and the most recent glacier leaving created what is today's Niagara Escarpment. So the ancient seabed rose up. Where we are right now, millions of years ago, was underwater and under a massive lake, and so a sea. And so we have those ancient crustaceans, and all of those types of geological formations are in the Niagara Escarpment. So big chunks of that come up into our the Niagara Escarpment continues to rise glacially, like very, very, very slowly, but as the pressure of the glaciers receded, the landmass rose up, and so underneath our soil, which is clay loam, it's all limestone and different types of sedimentary rock. So we've got that going on for us from a geology perspective. Then we have the lake effect of the 2 Great Lakes. Because we're a peninsula, and because the peninsula actually drops down, and in terms of degrees latitude, if you look at it if you look at us on Google Maps, or if anybody's ancient enough to have an actual globe and look at the lines of latitude, we're at the same level as Northern California in terms of where our degrees of latitude are, and so that combined with the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario and Lake Erie, create a moderate climate that allows us to grow tender fruit in this area. So when you think of, the first thing you think of Canada, you're probably maybe not thinking that we're growing tender fruit like peaches and pears and apricots and all of those types of things, but they grow very, very well here. And that's what's great about growing vinifera grapes here, that we have a long enough growing season, we get enough heat units, we get enough sunshine in order to produce some absolutely lovely grapes that become stunning wines. So that's sorry for the long geography. Those of you, I love geography and I love geology. But anyway, not everybody does. So I'll skip ahead now to the wines.
It's important stuff, right?
So I'll hand it over to Casey a little bit to talk about, why did you join us, Casey, in terms of what kind of wine, when we had the talk about what kind of wines we wanted to make. This is a quiz. What do you remember about what we were trying to do with our wines here?
Yeah, I think see, now we're live. I feel bad if I get it wrong. Anyway, no, I think, what we're really trying to accomplish here at Westcott is being true to the soil, being true to the land, and trying to make uniquely Canadian Niagara Westcott wines. And, I think every day we all as a team are trying to accomplish that kind of pursuit. So, and all of what you spoke to and the geology and the history of this region is, implicated in the wines that we ultimately make. So
I think that's very good, very important. And in addition to that, though, we have a saying here at Westcott that we only make wines that Carolyn likes to drink. So
I got it wrong.
I'm definitely a Burgundy lover. I've always been a Burgundy lover. I love the Loire too. I went to school in the Loire long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. But I love Burgundies, and so when we looked at not all those factors that I described a minute ago, and when we searched for the perfect property to create the wines that we wanted. And then when we made the selection in terms of the types of vines that we were going to plant, we went with all Dijon clones, with one exception. A little later, we added a Chablis clone because I love Chablis too. But the basis of those selections was that we love the wines from those areas, but they're also wines that we can grow well here. With the clay loam over the limestone, we have some of the same attributes. I think we get some of the same attributes as some of the top Burgundies. Our wines have been compared, in the case of the Pinots, to Volnay. Some of those types of characteristics come in. We had I won't name the name, but we had a well-known Burgundy Pinot producer here at our winery for a luncheon 2 summers ago as part of the International Cool Climate Chardonnay Festival. And we snuck a little bit of Pinot Noir into the lunch. Don't tell them. But and he called the waitress over, the server over, to look at the bottle that we were pouring, because he thought it was his own wine. He thought it was his wine from his vineyard, because we were going to be pouring that a little bit later. But in fact, it was our wine. So top Nuit Saint-Georges house with thinking that we were pouring his wine when in fact it was Westcott Pinot. So just a little bit of fun. So we should start maybe pouring some wines. So
Drink some wine.
so the wines that we're going to focus on today, I didn't say that at the beginning. So our first vineyard, all we planted was Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and so a lot of people thought that we were maybe a little bit crazy. That, you know, who makes that kind of definitive decision that you only have Pinot Noir and Chardonnay? That's a pretty big bet to make. So we our vineyard is planted 2/3 Pinot Noir, 1/3 Chardonnay, all, as I said, Dijon clones, with the exception of a little acre that we put. It's got a southeast facing slope, and it's a lot of glacial till in that part of the vineyard, and that's where we planted the Chablis clone. And then about a year and a half ago, November, we purchased a new vineyard, but in fact it's an old vineyard, one of the oldest vineyards in Canada, Butler's Grant. And these have some of the oldest vines planted in Canada of Riesling, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir, and Chardonnay. So we'll talk about one of those wines at the end. So if anybody sticks around to the end, we'll talk about one of those wines as a secret. But let's talk Pinot Noir and Chardonnay to start. So let's should we do this the French way? Start with the Pinot and go to the Chard, or well, we're in North America and it's the middle of the afternoon here, so you know technically I'm day drinking now, so you know I'm going to start with some Chardonnay.
The things we do for our international fans, right?
Absolutely.
Things we
absolutely. So here is our Estate Chardonnay 2018. These the two wines that we're pouring today are both in the UK, available through Daniel Lambert. So we're really excited about that. Casey, if you want, I'm going to pour you a bit of this beautiful Chardonnay. So maybe what I will do is I'll talk about the vineyard side of things, and then Casey can pick it up in terms of what he did with the grapes that we grew for him. How's that? So in 2018, it was actually a kind of a classic growing season, in that we had a it was pretty sunny. It was hot.
A lot of heat.
Sure. That's again the thing that we don't always we talk about being a cool climate producer, but in fact our summers can be quite hot here. You know, above 30 degrees. We had that summer, I think we had probably 20 or 25 days that were over 30 degrees. So very, very hot. So we have to adapt our viticulture every year to what the conditions are in terms of what's going on in a particular year, in terms of canopy, shading, or stripping leaves in order to expose the fruit to more sun. So we're constantly out there making those decisions on a situation by situation basis. So the harvest was kind of mid-September into towards the end of September. We had a beautiful, cooler September, which is again ideal when we get the cooler nights that keeps that acidity level nice where we want it, while you're getting a slower ripening in those last couple of weeks of our growing. When, in my opinion, that's when the grapes go on their phenolic journey. You know, you get more. They're just getting more interesting, more flavors. All of those things are happening towards the end of the ripening, and so we're always trying to balance that decision in terms of when to pick, with keeping an eye on the acidity level. So looking for the ripeness, but making sure that we've maintained the acidity. Our vineyard ripens in different ways at different times, just to make it really complicated. We have 28 acres here at Westcott under vine, and the north block of the Chardonnay, the northwest block of the Chardonnay ripens a bit faster than the south block of on the west side. The east block ripens differently from the west. So all that to say, there's a lot of attention on ripening and trying to absolutely pick for optimal drinking for wine. So Casey's out at the, like I said, he drives a heck of a tractor. So he's very hands-on in terms of the viticulture and with working with Garrett in terms of making the decisions on when we're going to pick. And then I hand it over to Casey to talk about 2018.
Thanks. So 2018 is a pretty interesting vintage to kind of add to Carolyn's point from earlier is, we chose, I didn't personally choose, but I chose to be part of this company, which is awesome. Pinot and Chard work really well here. And it's interesting because in 2018, our harvest is really easy to look at because we can watch it through the lens of what we do. But very shortly after, what was a pretty tight picking window, a lot of rain came. And typically when you have those hot summers, you tend to have fairly unsettled falls. And thankfully, people, Pinot and Chard tend to be the earliest ripening varieties, Pinot in particular, which is great because, we've chosen them. They ripen early, Pinot being a very delicate grape. We were able to get it in before those rains came. And it's very interesting because a lot of producers from, different varietals that ripen a little bit later, had some challenges in that year that we didn't have to face. So again, it comes down to understanding where you are, what makes this place special, and all of the things together, what make great wine. And we could talk about this more down the road, but like, to me, that kind of concept is what terroir is. It's a function of people, place, the decisions you make, the things that exist there, and how you get to be. Terroir can be great and terroir can be terrible as well. So bad decisions make bad terroir. So from there, 18, interesting year, to Carolyn's point, lots of heat, a little bit of unsettled weather with some rainstorms, which is always fun. But because of that heat, grapes in general were fairly small. We got a lot of interesting kind of concentration, for sure. I know, for me being my first vintage, I was pretty excited. I know, Carolyn and Grant were kind of like, why are the grapes so small? We haven't seen this before, but it made for a really interesting vintage for sure. This wine, I've been kind of watching the notes go up the side. Like, I totally agree with Daniel. Like, this is 100% wild ferment. We're, again, trying to express what this place gives us. And part of what it gives us is the microbiome that exists within the vineyard. So we have this kind of lovely, fruity, zesty, mineral-driven kind of wine, a little bit of a flinty kind of note, and then in the palate, it's got this kind of textural kind of event, a good kind of fruit weight, and I like how it has some structure that mimics the acidity. So, and we achieve this through a number of different ways. To what Carolyn was saying, we watch very carefully when we pick, when the acidity is where it needs to be. I think one of the hallmarks of Niagara, of the benchlands, which is where our vineyards are, is those beautiful shifts from hot days and cold nights, which maintains that acidity. So we don't want to lose that. That's something a lot of places can't always achieve. So we want to make sure that's a part of what we are putting into our wine. And then also, to Carolyn's point, we're a small vineyard. And we divvy things up as much as we possibly can. So you go down into our cellar, we have 20 plus barrel groups at any one time, and most of them are only 4, 5, 6 barrels a piece. And that's because we're trying to um, utilize every difference in our vineyard. Our vineyard slopes and moves, and to Cameron, we have hills and valleys. We have an east slope and a south slope. We have kind of a north plateau with a peak on it, and we have different clones growing in each one of these regions. And it's our job. As people who are inquisitive about the land and want to express what we can do to make sure that we understand the little parcel that we are working with. So we divvy them up as much as humanly possible to understand what each place is going to give us. And then we can kind of put together the wines we want from there. So that's kind of interesting. So,
well, it gives you a good palate. We were having this conversation yesterday about
sure.
a palette, like an artist making a painting, creating something that by doing what Casey just described with grapes coming from different parts of the vineyard, going into different barrels, it allows for a palette to work with as we do the assemblage in terms of the picking which barrels are going into the estate and which ones go into our reserve product, and which ones go as a single block. We did a block 76 wine based on just how things were playing out that year. We felt that it could go on its own. So maybe you could talk a little bit about our barrel strategy. I know that someone's commented about the oak, that it's nice, it's very balanced and nicely integrated. So maybe you could talk about our barrel strategy.
Yeah, for sure. So the Chardonnay tasting is 100% barrel fermented and barrel aged, wild mallow, 100% mallow as well. And we use a very kind of select number of barrel producers or coopers because
all French.
All
Burgundy.
100% French. Yeah, sorry, it's kind of to go without saying in my mind, but that's okay to be expressed for sure.
We're Canadian. We we're English and French. We're bilingual.
Fair enough. But yeah, exactly. So what we do is so we actually use only one cooper in our whites. It's Dami. We find it to be incredibly respectful of the fruit that we have here on the property, and it seems to integrate very well. We use a mixture of forests. I'm as a winemaker. I'm preferential to Allier. I love the body and flesh that it gives, and it's just like kind of round generosity. But we have, we have Vosges and Nevers, and then in our Pinots we have others as well. We have Chatillon, and we're trying to work our way through that. And different parts of the vineyard seem to reflect differently, which is one of the exciting things. And from there we're kind of really just looking for a balanced oak profile. So we're kind of pulling down the amount of new oak we're bringing. We're making more delicate, elegant wines. And, that's one of the things that we look for while we're putting together a wine is that balance, the texture, the aromatics, and what makes it quintessentially what it is. And our barrel profile, we do a little bit of stirring for sure to get that texture in there. But we like that reductive quality that it brings as well. And you can definitely pick that up on this. Like it opens up and evolves over time, which is fun.
It's really opened up in the glass just in the time that I've been drinking while he's been talking.
Yeah, here's my turn.
This is just a beautiful. I know it's my own, but man, oh man, this is a beautiful Chardonnay. Just a stunning Chardonnay, beautifully balanced, gorgeous structure. The other thing I noticed on our shards is there's just a hint of a saline on the finish, and it's a running theme that I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from. That if it's just in the grape, coming up through there's all kinds of debate about minerality. Is it really a thing? Saline, on the finish is to me another one of these things. That does it come from the soil through up into the grape and therefore into the wine, or talk amongst yourselves and come back to us on that one.
Yeah. Ask some thoughts for sure. But it's really interesting how it's developed, and I think it's really exciting because the Chardonnay is a tough one to keep in stock here, as I'm sure Kellen can comment
We
on.
sell out of our Chardonnay
Um,
all the time. I had some local consumers that were a little unhappy that I shipped more Chardonnay to the UK because we were out of it here. So that Chard that you have over there is in short supply. So we're trying to bring our vineyards up, and now with the addition of Butlers, we should have more Chardonnay coming into. Well, we do have more Chardonnay based on last year's harvest, but we notoriously have we it's in hot demand, our Chardonnay, and we've won international awards. I'm always kind of torn about talk. It's kind of tooting your own horn, but I do have to say right out of the gate we won a lot of international awards. Decanter, others, the World Wine, a number of different ones. We just won Texas for Texas Sommelier picked our Pinot Noir as the top red in their recent competition. So it's gratifying to know that people share my opinion that we make great wines. Okay, time for some Pinot. Oh, that bottle's boy. All I had was a couple sips, and I picked up the bottle that's closed. Okay, so here we go. Now we're going to switch to the Estate Pinot Noir from 2016. Whoops. There we go. I just have to get the camera angle. It's backwards. There we go. So that's the wine that that I just poured in the glasses. And maybe over to you, Casey, to talk a little bit about this wine.
So, in similar effect, our Pinots, I think. So Pinot is actually the grape that we grow the most predominantly on the Westcott home property, but also in combination with the new old Butler's property. It is the grape we grow the most of, and I'll be perfectly honest, it's the grape I'm most excited about as a winemaker. It's an incredible challenge. It's very exciting to be here and be hands-on in the vineyard the entire year through, because Pinot is just incredibly reflective of every move you make and kind of everything you do. It's funny. I was talking to a friend from 6 feet away recently about Pinot, and we're kind of comparing back and forth that, like, it's interesting. It's sort of like a frosted glass window in the way that you can see all the movements and all of the things that are happening behind it, but you can't really, make out any particular image in that way. But all of it has an impact to what you're seeing, and it's very true. Pinot is just this kind of sight glass of what a vintage is, and it'll never lie to you. And if you try and manipulate it into lying, it'll call you out pretty badly. So from that little anecdote, 16 as a growing season in Niagara was amongst probably some of the hottest on record recently. So, like, very dry, very hot, very kind of, like, I don't want to say uncharacteristic, but definitely not a normal vintage, if you can say there's a normal vintage in Niagara for us. So, like, a lot of fruit, a lot of body and build and texture on this. And as we said with the Chardonnays, we're trying to express place. So many small lots, wild ferment, and the interesting thing with our Pinots that started in 2016 was this concept of a whole cluster, which is something that I had some experience with in different situations. But it was very exciting to see the Westcotts already experimenting with this, because obviously it's a very well established technique used all across Burgundy and in different parts of the New World as well. And Niagara, we can do Pinot well, and we can ripen it very effectively. So it's interesting that there's been so little of it experimented with, to add another layer of complexity. So from yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So so there are two things that we started to do. We started in 2015 with using wild yeast. We did the native yeast for the first time in a small batch, just to see what our own yeast would produce. Prior to that, we were 100% selected yeast. And in 15, we also started to investigate this idea of whole cluster and what it would do. So when Grant and I aren't in the vineyard or doing work at the winery, we're still traveling. We travel all the time, and we're voracious readers, and we visit wineries whenever we can. And we've been to Burgundy many times, and so we always circle back to what's going into creating the best Burgundies. And we saw that there was a lot related to the whole cluster ferment, and not everybody's kind of opens their doors to let you know exactly what they're doing. So you have to do a bit of sleuthing to try to figure out some of those things. But we're always looking at best practice and trying to understand how can we make our wines better and better and better. And so I think the whole cluster is a really important addition to our evolution of making better and better Pinots. The challenge with doing whole cluster is there are a couple of challenges. One is
lots of challenges.
Lots of challenges.
Yeah,
let's be frank. Lots of challenges. First and foremost, you have to have the grape ripe enough that the pits are brown, so the stems are brown right through into the grape, and that can be a very challenging thing to do, to get it to that level of ripeness. The Burgundians would tell you that the longer on the vine, the better in terms of the Pinot, and so but we are susceptible to rot. We're a relatively humid environment here in Niagara, with those two lakes on both sides of us. So it is, it's a challenge to balance that ripening, get that, that phenolic journey that the grapes go on in the late stages of ripening. And then when you introduce whole cluster ferment, you've got another reason to try to leave the fruit hanging as long as possible, but you're dodging the weather all the way through the late fall. So as you get into September, we're susceptible to rain, and so we're always trying to balance that. But I think that the whole cluster has added a new dimension that takes our Pinots to the next level. The native yeast as well. When we started in with the wild yeast, there was nothing here on this land. It was open land. So the native yeasts are really back to that terroir discussion. The native yeasts are again a real expression of what's going on in our vineyard and right on the land, that you can't you can't replicate that in terms of trying to buy it from somewhere else or out of a catalog, because it's Brave New World for us in terms of what we're doing here. So we did it on a small we did it on a small basis to just see, because again, we've got a lot of our neighbors down here think we're pretty crazy for a number of the decisions that we've made. But we're always about making better and better wines. And I think that the wild yeast experiment has paid off gloriously. I'm so excited by what our native yeast is producing, and how we're going to continue to, again, just small things, small steps. We're dealing incremental improvements in terms of our wines from 1 year to the next as our vineyard matures. So, and 16 is this. I think this is just beauty. It's really coming into its own now. The challenge with our wines, our wines are ready to drink, or we don't release them. That's one of our rules. But they are highly structured. They continue to evolve in the bottle, and I'm finding right now with the 16 that I haven't had it. I haven't had it for a couple weeks, and it's tasting even better than what it was tasting a couple of weeks ago. I'm finding that it's just on its journey, but it's gorgeous wine as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited by it, and to be more technical, a few things obviously we do as well is all our reds are fermented in open top oak fermenters, which beside being pretty, serve a great practical focus that they allow us to be fairly gentle with how we handle temperature changes and extraction, because they are adding to the texture of the wine, but beyond that, they manage the temperatures pretty well. It's almost a buffering capacity, so that's really nice. All our ferments are fairly small scale, so we can split them up and really evaluate what each part of the vineyard has to do, what it's giving us, and each clone is giving us. And then one of the fun parts about whole cluster from kind of the technical winemaking geek side is we're really able to pull everything out of the grapes. And this is the thing that excites me the most, is when handled correctly, we can really extend our ferments, and we can really pull a lot of flavor and energy out of the grapes that, being at other wineries in the past, we weren't able to do with the kind of winemaking we were producing. We were losing caps and getting into really unstable sort of situations. Both the whole cluster, this sort of slow, consistent ferment that comes from the whole bunch basically fermenting its own pace, allows us to really be very gentle with the way we work with it, and very extensive in terms of the time we can do. So we're really pressing and making things happen in exactly the time frame we want. It allows us to do that. So, but it all starts with great viticulture. Bad grapes make bad wine. So obviously, huge inputs have been put into great place. And a lot of times put out there in a tight, intimate team. We're able to work together and make sure we're making great decisions. So that's great. And Pinot's delicious. So.
Yeah. So I'm seeing a couple of questions related to the longevity of the wine, and also in terms of natural winemaking. And so maybe we could talk a little. Casey's got an opinion on natural winemaking. And the other thing I think we should be talking about today a little bit, because it is Earth Day, and that we operate as a sustainable winery. We're very, very conscious of the fact that we are only here for a short period of time, and the land is here beyond us, and that we need to be good stewards of what we've been allowed to work with. And so we are in the Niagara. We're under the Niagara Escarpment Commission, which has its own act in the province of Ontario. All of the land that we operate on, both at the home farm and at Butler's Grant, are under that jurisdiction. We're part of the World Biosphere for the Niagara Escarpment. So we are we are producing our wines in already what is considered to be a protected environment, and so we operate with the greatest of care in terms of everything that we do, both in the winery and in the vineyard. So just a little shout out on Earth Day for sustainable farming, and that we are a very strong proponent of that. I'll hand it back over to Casey for the longevity of our wines, and then the natural, just, tone it down on the natural discussion.
Yeah. So for the longevity of the wines, one of the most interesting things about Canadian wine, and I think I saw a question that said like, what makes Canadian wine so much different than anyone else? And I've got another thing we do that's pretty unique, but um, that acidity we spoke about is really this beautiful pillar that holds the whole wine up. And again, selecting the right varieties and Pinot, when worked with correctly, has a fantastic tannin structure as well. And those are to me the two bases of a wine that evolves over time, and but can still maintain its proper poised structure. And to me, that's been good. So
I recommend to our friends that they buy a case of each of the wines and drink a bottle intermittently and see how they're aging.
Yeah.
That's what I do, but I'm lucky. I have a lot of my own wine in my cellar, and I can go down and pull a bottle out anytime I want. So not to be flippant about it, but the wines are ready to be consumed, or we don't release them. So that's kind of point number one on that. But I think it is and we're, our first vintage was 2012. So I'm still occasionally pulling out bottles from the cellar from the 2012 vintage, and they're drinking beautifully. They're highly structured. All the things that Casey mentioned, they're holding up extremely well. The Chardonnay is unbelievable still from 2012. Like, it's just stunning. But it is a different wine than it was when I was drinking it in 2014. So it's just all part of your personal philosophy, I guess, in terms of how you like to experiment with wine and aging it. The vast majority of people are purchasing wine and consuming it within a day or two of when they purchase it. So we want to be sure that that everything that we release from here is certainly ready to be enjoyed right away. So that was a good one. Someone asked, what do we do here in Canada that Vigneron nowhere else in the world do? And that's a great question. I'm looking out the window right now at our vineyard, and we have two things that are quite interesting. The challenge one of the biggest challenges that we have is protecting the vinifera vines during our winters. So while we have, as I mentioned earlier, quite warm and hot and sunny growing season, our winters can occasionally be, even in Niagara, can be quite brutal. So the vines and the buds on the vine, of course, the buds going into the winter have the grapes for next year's crop on them, inside those buds. And if we get to a minus, they're beyond minus 18 for most of the vinifera varietals. They are susceptible to that deep cold. So if we get down to minus 18, minus 19, minus 20, minus 21, it will kill the buds. So and then we're dealing with a reduced crop going into the next year. It doesn't kill the vine, but it kills the bud that has the grapes in it. So it's very challenging, that part of our weather. And so we have two coping mechanisms that we're using here that I think are relatively unique to Ontario or Canada. The first is that we have wind machines that are located in several places in our vineyard, and we set those the wind machines on to come on when we hit certain temperature thresholds, and that causes the wind from the machines pushes the warmer air. The warmer air is higher up, and colder air falls. So it pushes the warmer air down and pushes the cold air out of the vineyard or down into down into the lowest parts of the vineyard down by the creek. So we can get heat inversion out of that process of almost 5 degrees. So it's the difference between saving a bud and not saving a bud in a -20 situation. And then last year we started another project where we are actually a couple of years ago we tried burying our vines, which is something that some of our friends do in the Prince Edward County region of Ontario, where they have even colder winters than we do here in Niagara. We tried burying a section of our vineyard. It's very disruptive, invasive, hard on the vines. We found that wasn't working very well for us. And so when we looked at getting geotextiles, so blankets. So now we almost forget exactly how many acres. It's 8 acres of our 28 acres in the sections that are most susceptible to where the coldest air falls, because it kind of drains like water. Cold air, think of it like water. It runs downhill. And so the sloping parts that end down at the creek, the 20-mile creek runs through our property. Those are where the coldest pockets are. So we blanketed those areas. So they're like a teepee from the fruit wire down to the ground. And we have thermometers registering the temperatures all through the vineyard through this past winter, and it's worked phenomenally well. Again, at times it was 10 degrees warmer underneath the blankets. So again, it's just the difference between having a crop and not having a crop on some sections of the vineyard. So very unique, I think, to our area. And again, our neighbors think we're kind of crazy, but what the heck.
But I think it speaks to how serious Westcott is about making great wine. Wouldn't be making those kind of efforts if we didn't care. So, the other thing that, needs to be mentioned is these are above and beyond kind of processes that, although you're right, they're unique to Canada, they're processes that happen in very delicate times of the year that we're already kind of, working against the clock, so to speak. So it's this kind of hard work and creativity that is allowing us to produce the wines you guys are getting to taste. And to that point, the part of the vineyard that it's under blanket is one of the most interesting parts of the vineyard. It's our south-facing slopes. Again, maybe reminiscent of the concept of the south-facing slopes of Burgundy, which is a very rare attribute in Niagara, because the escarpment we spoke of earlier actually points north. So most all elevation changes or undulations in geography are north-facing, just because that's the way the lake is and that's the way things have been done. Because of our location, we actually have a fairly significant southern slope, and it's been, has the opportunity to be an incredible part of the vineyard. But because of these cold challenges, maybe we haven't got to explore it as much as maybe we want to. But these creative out of the blocks kind of problem solving that the team is putting forward here at Westcott, we're going to get to explore that more and more, and I think it's only going to give more definition and character to what we do here. So
I hope so. So we had a question about COVID-19 and how it's affecting our plans for the growing season, labor shortage, commercial channel challenges. So COVID-19 has created a number of challenges for us. Fortunately, our vineyard workers are local people, so we didn't have the challenge of that some other tender fruit and vineyard owners have, in that they've had challenges getting their workers in to come and work. Ours, for the most part, live about 20 kilometers from here. So we're in pretty good shape on that front. But we are also in Ontario. We have very restricted ability to sell our wines as a small winery. The LCBO, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, is the main way that most people buy their wines. And we're such a small winery, we have very limited distribution through the LCBO. So we count on most of our sales being here at the winery, and either direct to restaurants, predominantly in Toronto or Ottawa, and then we have a small portion historically online where we ship direct to consumers, and then the rest is on site. So people coming to enjoy a tasting. We have an outdoor patio in the summer, 5 months of the year, with fantastic chefs and all kinds of fun stuff going on outside. And we're not sure when we're going to be able to open that up this year. So we're planning and hoping that there may be that we may be able to open up in May or June. But that it'll be a pretty significant challenge for us to get our wine to customers. In the short term, the response to buying online and having us ship direct to our customers has been absolutely astounding to us. Sorry, I'm going to choke up because we're so heartfeltly thankful for our customers that have stepped up and bought our wine.
Yeah,
Casey, you need to talk now.
I'll talk. I also would like to reflect that sentiment. It's the reason we're still here is because of everyone who's doing this. So thank you very much. It's beautiful to know there's such a support system for our small winery. It's amazing. That said, I see my friend James is still trying to get me to answer the natural wine question, so I'll get to that. So disapprove is aggressive. I think it was worked up maybe more than I think. My concept on wine in general is you're going to do whatever is right for the wine, and as a winemaker, you should be trying to express place and variety and concept and vision of the winery. Natural wine, it's tough because anyone I think who is trying to go down the lane of good winemaking and good vineyard stewardship and really a care for the product is making, let's call it a natural wine. It's a natural product. We're growing it, like we're looking at the vineyard, as Carolyn said, we're no more than 20 meters away from the product that we're creating. People that we work with and see and live with every day are working the land. We're doing, ferments and we're working with the grapes in the most delicate ways to try and make sure that we're as careful to make them. So this natural wine movement is sometimes for me a bit frustrating because they make it seem like everything we've done to this point has been some sort of overblown, manipulative, aggressive campaign against grapes and vineyards, where, I think, as my own personal opinion, I'm always trying to make the absolute best decisions, definitely in the winery, and I work obviously with everyone, and Garrett, our vineyard manager, to make the best decisions in the vineyard so that we're able to create these wines.
I think we are making natural wines.
Exactly.
I think it's the definition that gets stuck in Casey's craw sometimes, I think, and in terms of the definition of natural. We are, for all intents and purposes, we're creating a natural wine, but we will have intervention at points that we need to have it in order to, because we will not produce a wine that isn't isn't stunningly beautiful to drink, and that's what our overarching goal is. But absolutely, everything from whole cluster to natural yeast to we're on the natural path as much as anybody, but we're not going to be slavish to some definition in order to that's what we do. That's the way we are.
Yeah. So, and again, wine is a natural product. We're working with a local thing, and no, it's very
fun.
interesting.
It's fun to have a bit of
it is
tension in the dialogue.
Exactly, and we're just trying. And again, to Karen's point, we're always just trying to make the best wines, and something that's really interesting when which may be comparable to other places in the world, but I spent time in California as well. They have a lot more consistency in what their vintages provide. In Ontario, we don't, and this is not a point that I'm trying to say is good or bad or better or worse. Just we work, and Carolyn alluded to this, we work with really unique situations every single year. So to steadfast say we're not going to use this product, or we're not going to do this, or we're going to behave this way as a line in the concrete, not sand, is really difficult, because you could get yourself into some pretty potentially difficult situations.
We did someone St. Andrews, hi St. Andrews Wine Company, I love you guys. How's Ollie? We don't want the bits floating in your wine. Exactly. I think we've talked enough about this. We have a reasonable kind of practical approach to everything, but one thing we won't compromise on is our wines need to be stunningly beautiful and lovely to drink. Won't do anything that will ever jeopardize that. And we have another question about which vintage would you say has been the most successful? I get asked that a lot. That's like asking which of your children you like the most. I think our vintage, because of what we're doing, and we all do have our favorite child. There's no question, but
I don't have any children.
Every vintage is different, and we're on a journey. So I like to think that every year our wines are getting better and better, and it is that our best vintage is the one that we just had, and because that's the reality of a learning organization that we are, an evolving organization, a young organization, and that's part of the journey that we're on. And what's exciting for that, I think, for people that want to be on that, we love having these conversations. We love meeting people that care about the journey that we're on and are interested in the journey that we're on, and we like them to join us on that journey in terms of seeing how we evolve. And then back to vintage. Do we have vintage stock to sell? One of the things we haven't talked about is we did talk about how our wines sell out. But it's also how small we are. So, and in the first few years, 2012 was our first vintage. We had just a couple of hundred cases of most of our wines as we were producing it. And this past vintage, we'll have made about 8,000 cases of wine. So we are still a micro winery in the world of wine. We try to hold back a certain number of cases from every year, and we have those in our library. People that are here in North America that can come and visit us and become part of our wine club. We have special dinners and special events where we bring some of those back vintages out. But we have very, very limited numbers of bottles of all of our back vintages. So we're hanging on to them. And then, of course, I have the secret stash in my private cellar that I just shared some information I probably shouldn't have. Okay, I think
We got they're pushing. Which child don't you like the most?
Yeah.
You're allowed to answer vintages.
Oh
So,
no, I can neither confirm nor deny that I have a favorite child.
no. It's to Carolyn's point. It's really hard to say you have a preference in vintage or not. They all present their own wild successes and difficulties, and you love each one of them for what they are. And the wines are hopefully telling the story of that vintage. So it's more looking at a photo book than than saying you did something right or wrong or something was bad or good. Um, and that's my opinion. It's great. The 16 is what it is, and it was amazing because of the reasons it was. And
Yeah.
the 17 will be that way, and the 18 will be that way, and the 15 before that will be that way. So
we've been down tasting even the 19 vintage, and I'm going to say it. I think that 19 is going to be our best vintage yet. It's just they're just beautiful wines, and we don't sell a bad wine. That's the bottom line. Maybe we should leave it at that.
Yeah, I like it. What a bombshell drop! Boom, no bad wine.
So I think we're at. I think we've been at this for an hour. That's probably more than long enough for everybody. So we're gonna sign off. Thanks again. Thanks for tuning in. And as I said, the 2 wines that we were drinking tonight. Oh, I didn't talk about Butler's Grant. The Riesling.
No, we're not done yet.
So sorry, just quick
like
for anybody
encore.
that's still here. I said if you stayed to the end. So we just have our first Riesling. Sorry, this camera, I've got to do it backwards. There, okay. It's counterintuitive. So we produced I mentioned that we produced a new / old vineyard, Butler's Grant, and that was a picture of our first Riesling that Westcott has produced off of that product, off that property. 40-year-old vines planted by Herman Weiss. It's the vineyard. We're just so excited about the Butler's Grant vineyard. The wines that we've been tasting from the 2019 harvest are absolutely exceptional, and so we're really excited about that. So there's more to come out of the Butler's Grant vineyard. So you heard it here first, and you're an insider in terms of what's coming. And you need to talk to Daniel about whether we ship any of the Riesling over to the UK. So now we'll leave it again. That really is the end. This is the end of our show. Bye.
Bye, guys. We're still on. FYI.
Okay.
You have to leave.
Okay. I need to figure out how to shut it off.
I've never done that. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.